morning, Stephen. How are you
Good
today?
morning. I'm doing pretty well, and yourself?
I'm doing good.
Glad to hear it.
Yeah. Hey, before we get started, last week we had a few conversations going in the chat. It felt a little bit difficult, and we thought it would be easier if, somebody has questions or you want to get more information, that maybe we provide a means for people to come on and
Talk.
be on screen and talk. So I just wanted to put this, and I'll put it in the comments as well. If that happens, if at some point in the show you want to come on and have a conversation with Stephen, we welcome you to use this link, and then you can come on. You can choose to be on camera or off, but at least we will be able to hear you, and it might make things a little bit easier. So definitely use that. And maybe Stephen, if you see that's happening with somebody, remind them to.
But the way it works is that they need to close their YouTube tab, right? They need to close the current tab they're in and open this one. So my suggestion is, if you're the sort of person who's been wanting to talk in the past, like, oh, I've got something to say, I hate typing it, and you think maybe I'm going to contribute, participate by voice, you can close right now and open up insum.ca/join us, and then you'll be ready to go. So feel free to join through that link as well. Is that okay, Michelle?
They need to still be having the YouTube open to watch. I just think as soon as they're ready, click the link, close the YouTube. Okay. We'll figure it out. If we have trouble with feedback, we'll work it out when it happens. So I put the link in the chat.
I guess I didn't quite understand that, folks. Sorry. Okay, so moving on. So yes, we continue to have hot, not too dry weather here. Lots of rain. It's incredibly lush and green. Spending lots of time outdoors. I hope you spend time outdoors too, and perhaps reflect for a moment on how little amounts of your life you spend actually in your own world, as opposed to in a room, in a car, on a road, in a parking lot. So go out in your world. It's a great one. Okay, so I'll come back onto my soapboxes later. I have so many of them. What I'm going to talk about today is SQL code. So, I'm doing a tip every week. PL SQL is not exactly the most unlimited language compared to some others. So sometimes I'll have big tips. Sometimes I'll have kind of small tips. This is a relatively small tip in the sense that it's about one little thing called the SQL code function. So we're going to explore the SQL code function today. Then we'll take a look at some groups to contribute to. One of you will pick the organization. And I have a favorite book I want to share with you too, which will blow your minds. Okay. Yay. Share my screen, please.
I will. I just have to call attention to a comment from Neelish. I'm sure you haven't worked this out yet, that your nickname for yourself is Fewer Trees. So Neelish, only if you mispronounce Stephen's last name, because it's not Feuerstein, it's Feuerstein.
Right, and in fact, that's not even the correct pronunciation in German. So Feuerstein is how you say my name in German. Führer or Fewer is a different spelling, not F-E-U-E-R, but thanks for that, Neelish. Thanks a lot. Okay, any other comments?
No, you're
all right,
free to go on.
So we've got this function called SQL code. And it's a function that returns the error code of the currently raised error inside your PL SQL session. And there are a whole bunch of interesting aspects to SQL code, which I wanted to go over with you today. So I'm just going to dive right in. And in fact, I'll just ask you some questions. We'll see how it goes. It may be that there's too much of a pause and I've got too many scripts, but we'll start this way and we'll see how it goes. By which I mean, I'm going to create this table that accepts a single column, an error code with this of type string. I'll show you why I'm doing that later. It doesn't matter for SQL code. Then I'm going to insert into my log error table the SQL code. Something went wrong. I need to log the error. Put SQL code into my table. Does anybody know what will happen when I try to do this? So we'll give a little bit of a pause here while you think about that piece of code and what you think will happen. And it's so hard for me to be silent. It's really something. I don't think I'm a compulsive talker, but I could be a little bit more comfortable with silence than I am. No comments yet, eh? See, that's the problem with this sort of thing.
Yeah.
I just can't stand it. Okay, so let's run some code.
Well, you did just saying it will not work.
It will not work. Judith is correct. This will not work. Let's run the code. So what the heck? I can call a function, right, in SQL? Well, not this function. So if I try to run this piece of code, come on, I just reset this session. Come on. You got to be kidding me. Did I get disconnected? That would be so irritating. No. I'm connected. Okay. What are you doing? Okay, so it will not work. It turns out, okay, let's try it again without an IO error timeout. See if it'll work now. I need to reconnect, I guess. So reconnect. So it turns out that SQL code and its sister function SQL ERRM, SQL error message, it cannot be called inside SQL. And I would really love to prove it to you, but this is so strange. I had literally just reset this account, and I don't really want you to do that. Wow. Okay, folks, as long as we're having fun, right? So now I've frozen out my session trying to connect to a session that it can't connect to, and for some reason, okay.
Force quit.
This is hilarious. Right, there we go. Now this one should reconnect. Maybe. So SQL code is a function that's in PL SQL. It's actually defined in the standard package. I'll touch on that in a second. If I can ever put my environment back together, I don't know what's going on. It is not connected. Right. So we're just going to have fun. You're going to watch me have fun. Maybe I lost internet. No, it didn't lose internet.
No, because we can still see and hear you. So that bit's working.
That's right. So funny. Anyway,
what
so
you shut down? You want to?
I'm reconnecting.
Reboot.
For some reason, it didn't want to just do a reconnect. So we're going to do that. It's not allowing me to connect. Wow. Okay. So I thought I had a connection all set up in advance that I could use so I wouldn't have to use Live SQL. But I'm going to use Live SQL and stop wasting your time.
Jamal's suggesting it might be a VPN issue.
Thank you, Live SQL. You never fail to be there for me when I need you the most. All right, let's log into Live SQL. Let's bounce.
It's all good. You're among friends, Stephen. Oh,
sure.
There was some interesting message there.
That's okay. So here we go. Live SQL. Start coding. So I try to run SQL code, and it tells me no. It tells me no. Column is not allowed here. It's kind of an interesting error message. I haven't tried to diagnose why that comes up in this case, but the bottom line is that you can't call SQL code or a SQL error message inside SQL. Pretty strange. I don't know why. So as I mentioned before, it is defined, the standard package. So hopefully you know about standard. Come on, don't freeze up on me. Okay, thank you. Let's save this before I lose anything.
Rachel's issuing a challenge next week, maybe. That it's my turn to do SQL.
That sounds great. So the standard package, hopefully you all know about it. It's a default package. It's the number one default package. DBMS standard is number 2. And it has a lot of the basic elements that you think of as being defined in PL SQL. I think maybe I'll come back and talk about standard in a future tip. But for now, we can just see that SQL code is actually defined here as a function, as a SQL error message. Notice SQL code returns an PLS integer, which is a PL SQL data type. Connor McDonald hypothesized that may be related to why it's not callable in SQL, or at least it was never intended to be called in SQL. I don't have a definitive answer there. Not that important. You just can't do it. So what do you do instead? Well, you have to declare a local variable, or I suppose you could declare a package variable. And then you can insert that value. You get the SQL code and insert it in. Now my question for you, I think seen some comments here, but I'm assuming you're not finding anything else that we need to do. Respond to is, what will I see when I run this code? What will I see when I run that code?
Niels is saying that sys.standard.SQL code would work.
I just saw that, and I think, Nils, you're saying that it will work inside. So Nils thinks we'll see 1 here. So I call SQL code in my declaration section, insert, display, and the answer is no, I'll see 0. So SQL code returns 0 whenever it's being called and it's not inside the exception handler. In other words, if there's no error, SQL code returns 0. Now, let's go back and explore what Nils said. Stop asking me that, saying that. Let's go back here, and you're saying that if I fully qualify the reference, then it's going to work? Would be really something. Sys.standard.SQL SQL code. Whoa. Mind
I love
blown.
it. I love it.
Nils, why? If you have any idea about why that is, that's fantastic. I'll keep going, but that's really great. Thanks so much for that. Okay, so you can't call it directly, but you can call it with sys.standard. You can always put it into a local variable. It always returns 0 unless called from within the exception handler. Now, that might raise an interesting question. So here we go. As I said before, or as you actually can see in the documentation, which I'll publish a link to in the blog post that comes with this session, it says that it returns 0 when it's not called from within an exception handler. And you might say to yourself, well, if I create this procedure, it's going to show me the value of SQL code. It's not inside an exception handler right here. So is it always going to return 0 or show 0 when it's called through this procedure? So let's run this block. I show SQL code, raise an exception, trap the exception, show SQL code. And no, it shows me the error number. So what they really mean in the documentation is that it doesn't have to be inside the exception handler at compile time, but it has to be called from within an exception handler at runtime. So somewhere down the chain of command, chain of calls, you hit the call to SQL code from within a starting point inside an exception handler. I'm sure that's pretty obvious to everybody, but now we all know for sure, and maybe Nils has a tip for that one too. Okay, keep going. Now let's talk about a really odd little situation in which a single error has two different error codes. So we're kind of moving away from SQL code per se to the related topic of what sort of values SQL code returns or are available for SQL code to return in an Oracle database. It can get pretty funky. So let's take a look at this piece of code. I'm going to declare a variable called dummy based on the dummy column. I'm going to select one row from the dual table. Well, no, I'm going to select no rows. And the question is, what is SQL code here? What will be displayed on my screen when I trap, and let's be more specific, when I trap no data found, display SQL code? Any thoughts? And any other comments I should take a look at while they're thinking about that? Kevin says I should install a local database on my computer. Kevin, you are so right. And I guess I will. I have to install VirtualBox, run a database in Linux, deal with Linux shell commands. No, thank you. I should set up SQL Developer to talk to the VirtualBox database. I've always had trouble doing that. I may at some point go back and try it again with some help from experts at InSum. This is why it's a good reminder to all of you that I am not a computer scientist. I'm not a software engineer. I'm not even a technologist. I'm a popularizer of a language. So all that other stuff just gets in my way. Okay, any answers to this one?
Niels and Judith were pretty much neck and neck with the same answer.
They're pretty smart, aren't they? So I'm going to raise no data found. I look at the SQL code, and we get a very interesting answer. 100. It's a number one, it's a positive number, and there are only two positive numbers that you can possibly get from SQL code. And you can think about what the other one might be. It's going to come up in a moment, but it's 100. So why is that strange? Well, let's take a look at this. Let's take a look at, this. Well, first of all, let me remind you that no data found is an interesting error because you don't get it just from a select into. There are actually 3 or 4 different circumstances, including trying to look at an element in an array that doesn't exist. So if I try to read a row in an array, I get unsupported command. No, run it again. There we go. I get the same SQL code, 100. But if I don't handle the exception, what will I see? What error code will I see if I don't handle the exception? If you say the same error code, that's a reasonable thing to think, but I think I've pretty well identified that it's not going to be the same number. Anybody have an idea about what number will be shown instead of 100? Think on that one, Nils and Judith. You can't get them all right. Let's see if we got any other comments. No. And Judith comes through with 1403. Judith thinks we're going to see 1403. And oh, Judith, you're so close. But I say what you're seeing is negative 1403, and we're going to talk about positive and unsigned integers in a moment. But this is the funny thing. The no data found exception has two different error codes inside Oracle, 100 and negative 1403. I think this is because 100 is the ANSI standard code for no data found. You can see it in DB2, in SQL Server, etc. So I think from the very beginning, Oracle supported the ANSI standard, but also for whatever reason surfaces up this other error code, minus 1403, but only when it's unhandled. If you handle it and get the SQL code, you see 100. That's weird, huh? Strange stuff. Okay. But you can at least argue that SQL code and SQL error message would be consistent, right? They both return the same things. Well, no, why would you think that? So SQL code returns 100. SQL error message returns the minus 1403, just to keep you well confused. Cruising right along. Here's another interesting thing about 100 and 1403. Oops. So pragma exception init allows me to associate a user-defined exception with an error number. Let's see what happens when I try to associate it with negative 1403. It says, no, illegal error number, negative 1403. If I change it to 100, then it works. And then let's raise E. And what are we going to see? I'm not even sure. We're going to see negative 1403, even though we raised 100. Oh, it's so much fun. Here's another funny thing. I can set it to, let's say, minus 1404. I can set it to that. Oh, these are all good error numbers. I thought I would be finding one that doesn't have an error. Come on. Put in another number. Now it just says unhandled exception. In other words, it doesn't know what you're talking about. But this is interesting. So now I'm going to put in some crazy number. Illegal Oracle error number 2. 2. What is that? Where does it get 2 from? Am I having too much fun with PL SQL? You too can have this much fun with PL SQL if you don't have a real job. Don't tell my manager I said that. Okay, let's talk about positive and negative error codes. So it turns out that there are only two positive error codes and one, natural, 0. So if I run this code, notice that I have an exception with no pragma exception in it, so I don't associate it with a different number. So you can see that the SQL code returns 1, and the error message is simply user-defined exception, right? So number 1 is the error code associated with user-defined exception. So 1 and 100, the only positive error numbers. Everything else is negative, which leads to another interesting situation, which has to do with internal inconsistencies at Oracle. So I think we can agree that Oracle error codes are, generally speaking, negative numbers. If I try to do a pragma exception in it to a positive number, it just blows up. What are you talking about? Like 1403 or 1402 or whatever the case may be. So negative numbers, right? But there are a couple of utilities inside PL SQL that will store the error code, get the SQL code or whatever mechanism they use, and store it inside some kind of persistent or non-persistent memory area. Let's see what we get when we use those. First of all, we've got db log errors. I've done a talk about this, or many talks about this. Let's go ahead and create this error log table. So this creates a table called error $_ log error table. And if I try to run an SQL statement, this is why I declared the data type as a number, so I can make it blow up more. I'm sorry, as a string, so I can make it blow up more easily. So now
you really are enjoying this, Stephen.
What's not to enjoy, right? So I'm trying to insert a row into this table, and it just says no, sorry, value too large for column. Maximum length was 10. Okay. But now what I'm going to do is go back there and try it again with log errors. So now I'm saying, look, keep on going. No matter how many rows you want to insert, it's still just one, obviously. And if you get any errors, write it out to my error logging table. Notice, no more errors, but 0 rows inserted. Okay, let's take a look at what's in our error table. 12899. So here we go. Aura dash. Obviously, some people inside Oracle think it's a dash and not a negative. 12899. And the value stored is 12899, not with a negative. Now, to me, that raises an interesting question. Do I have more code on that below? Yes. So by the way, just one more thing. So log errors stores them as unsigned integers. And the same thing is true with for all save exceptions. So with save exceptions, then I can look at the SQL% bulk exceptions and get the error code for my collection of records. I run this code, and that's right, no negative sign. So both log errors and bulk exceptions store unsigned integers, which had me thinking, now wait a minute. What if I raise a dupe val and index error? That's -1. Unsigned, it's 1. User-defined exception is 1. Do we have a problem here? Are we going to end up with a 1 that's ambiguous in these data sets? Well, let's take a look. Because again, obviously, too much time on my hands. So I'm going to create a function that simply raises dupe val and index. I'm not even going to bother trying to create a unique index and so on and so forth. So there's my function, dupe val and index. Then I'm going to create a trigger. We all know triggers should be put on all tables in all possible ways. That's what Tom Kite said. And he's not around to defend himself. Okay, so I create my trigger. And all it's going to do is cause a failure. Then I'm going to try to insert into my table. Just to bend your mind a little bit, I'm going to insert -1, dupe val and index. Doesn't matter in this case. But I shouldn't highlight it. 0 rows inserted. Why? Because of the trigger. So now we look at the table again. Okay, we've got a problem, right? Instead of -1, it's 1. So if I have a user-defined exception in my trigger, we're going to end up with 2 of the same values for different reasons, right? Maybe. Let's check. So now I'm going to change to a function that simply raises an user-defined exception not associated to any number. So we know that that's a SQL code of 1. I'm going to replace my trigger. And then I'm going to try to insert again. And then I'll take a look at the table. Okay, so here's the good news. I don't know if anybody thought about it, but we don't have a problem because if the SQL code is 1 coming out of a user-defined exception, it's reported as 6510. So Oracle error is undefined user-defined exception, unhandled user-defined exception. Remember, Aura are Oracle errors, PLS are compile errors, PLW are warnings. So basically what they did was turn a PL SQL exception into an Oracle error. They have a separate error code for that. And therefore, we don't have to worry about 1 and -1 causing ambiguity inside log error tables or SQL% bulk exceptions. Whew, I think that's all the stuff I had for SQL code. Let's take a look. Is that the end of my script? Yeah, that's the end of my script. So let's stop sharing my screen for a moment. Let's cover any questions and comments. See what we got.
So this was a while back, Hemant said, and I'm sure this isn't your goal, but that you've confused, you have everyone confused with the 100 or minus -1403. I think that was.
Well, I guess it is confusing. So, yeah. So in general, I think we're used to seeing Aura -14 or a -1403. And of course, we read it as Aura -1403, but it really is a negative, I think. Mm-hmm. It doesn't really matter too much. This is one of those topic areas that is, hopefully it's entertaining, it's interesting. It's not going to matter too much in your day-to-day lives, in part because you should be using a generic logging procedure that calls SQL code for you. Very rarely will you want to be calling SQL code yourself. So I'm sorry if that confused you. It's just kind of like, here's some fun stuff to know about Oracle database and probably forget pretty soon, but you can always go back to my blog post and video and get a full update. Yes, we'll have the presentation. I did go through it quickly. I'll also have all the scripts on Live SQL.
I'm going to agree with him. I think part of what was very entertaining about today's episode was just watching you work and get very excited and go through things very quickly. So I'll be like Hemant, watching things slowly again. That was
The things I get
very
excited about,
entertaining.
huh?
Yes,
Yeah.
really. It was.
So Deval asks, does the positive number mean successful execution with some warnings? No. So in Oracle, 0 means successful. Positive number means an error. So either it's number 1, which means you defined an exception yourself and raised it, and you didn't associate it with a number other than 1 using pragma exception init. Or it's 100, and that's just the artifact of an ANSI standard setting a long time ago, I believe. There are other situations. I know I was looking around at other databases and technologies and how they handled SQL code. And I think maybe in Postgres, a positive number is successful with warnings or problems, but successful, which I couldn't really get my head around. I mean, in a sense, I suppose you could say that it's sort of like when you compile a program in PL SQL and it compiles, but you have warnings. But of course, we did that entirely differently with the whole PLW dash number to indicate warnings. I like that. Rachel Barker, this one wasn't keeping me up at night. I'm glad. Hopefully nothing keeps you guys up at night regarding technology.
But it was still worth Rachel's time this week to join because she actually picked one of our organizations.
Right. So we're coming up at the end of the half hour. Keep going. You know, if you have other comments or questions, keep doing it. But now we're going to switch over to talking about a few organizations. And have you picked the person you'd like to ask to pick for this week?
Well, I almost feel like it has to be Rachel, and I'd love to pick her organization because no, you're not good with that?
Well, she proposed the organization. I don't think it's fair that we should have her pick her own organization. Honestly, I think we should give it to Nils because, I mean, really, he made something work that I didn't think could work, and I have no idea why it works. And Nils, are you going to ever tell us why it works? So I think that Nils should pick. I know he's picked before, but so share my screen.
I will share.
And let's go ahead and take a look at the organizations. And by the way, all the rest of you can pitch, and you can say what you would like the money to go to, and then we'll ignore you. But we can still hear what you've got to say. So 3 organizations this week. One is, and this was recommended by Rachel Barker, Global Penguin Society, helping protect and save penguins. I mean, really, how can you go wrong? Penguins are amazing creatures, but really every single creature alive is totally amazing. Even humans. Okay, second, Save the Frogs. So this is a campaign by the Friends of the Sea to save frogs for a whole variety of reasons. Just in case you didn't know, there's a fungus called chytrid, which is raging across the world. It wasn't, I don't think they really know exactly where it came from. It's natural. It occurs naturally in frog populations. But certainly because of our movement around the world, we've spread it. And what it does is coat the frog's skin and asphyxiates them. It strangles them. And frog species around the world are being wholesale wiped out by this fungus. Hopefully we'll come up with a solution. Can certainly use our help. And then Ocean Cleanup, the Ocean Cleanup Organization, is doing all sorts of cleanup and removal of plastic and other trash from our oceans. We can't survive without oceans, just like we can't survive without trees. So Nils, give it a thought. Global Penguin Society, Save the Frogs, Ocean Cleanup. And while you're thinking about that, I'm going to share with you my recommended book of the day. It's called Animal Architecture. If you could stop sharing for just a moment so I can put this up in front of you. Animal Architecture by Ingo Arndt. It is an amazing book by amazing creatures. You can share my screen again so they can see the link and the picture. So animal architecture is about one of my favorite topics, really. In fact, yeah, can you put me up on the screen and then that just to the side? I think you just had that, no? Okay, anyway, animal architecture I think is really, really valuable for us to read because it attacks one of the most interesting aspects of being human, which is what makes humans special and unique and wonderful. We really get into this, right? Oh my God, no other species has ever discovered the secret of evolution by natural selection. And I think to myself, well, that's great, but all we're doing is killing everything that evolved by natural selection. So what's so great about us having discovered it? But really almost anything you can talk about as being unique to humans, like architecture, art, family, love, any of that stuff, everybody's got it. Everybody out there, all these different species. And animal architecture really drives the book home when you read about what animals do just with their body plans, how they manage with their body plans to make the most amazing things for their families, for themselves, for their enjoyment. It's really mind-blowing. And it helps give us all, I think, a little bit of humility. And we need a lot of humility these days and a lot less plastic. So I ask you also today, if you haven't already done it, choose to not consume some single-use plastic that you might have otherwise consumed, and you will help keep creatures on this planet alive. So what do you think? Is that enough soapboxing for one day? Maybe. Oh, you're muted.
No, I was just saying it's not soapboxing. It's yeah, I love it. It's important stuff.
Thanks. So there we have it. In more detail than you ever thought you'd want to hear about. We learned something new. I learned something new today regarding calling SQL code. Amazing. And I'll check in with my friends at Oracle to see if I can get an understanding of that. Thank you, Nils. Hopefully you're staying safe. You already have been vaccinated, and do everything you can to help your friends and neighbors be safe and healthy, and enjoy all your coding. And again, Rachel, thank you for suggesting an organization. And the rest of you, please feel free to suggest an organization that's near and dear to your own hearts regarding the world around us, and also recommend or suggest tips. And you can even come on and give the tip. So
we haven't picked one. We haven't picked a winner, though.
Oh, Nils, you haven't picked. Give it.
No, Niels wanted to give it to Hemant. So he's
okay. Well, we haven't seen rules about being able to transfer. I suppose that choosing the organization is fungible. So Hemant, are you still there? Do you want to pick? Otherwise, we're going to go with penguins.
Jamal feels very strongly about penguins. Penguins.
Now, Rachel is concerned about frogs too. She could go either way. It looks like. All right. Penguins it is. We're going to donate our money to penguins. Thank you, Rachel, for suggesting that. And the frogs will just have to get by without our money for this week.
For
next week. Yeah. Yes, and stay away from all the mutations of the virus by getting vaccinated and staying masked. When I go out and I'm in public, and especially indoors anywhere, I wear a mask. I'm fully vaccinated. Yeah. I wear a mask, and I'm going to do that for a while to come. Nothing wrong with that. In fact, obviously, there are societies in which they generally wear a mask as a sign of respect for others and reduction of illness, generally having nothing to do with this pandemic. So, all right, enough of that. Take care, everybody. Happy coding. See you next week.
See you next week, everyone. Thanks.